Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 6 of Duality. We are back again on a Friday afternoon at 12 p.m. in New Zealand. I know that's slightly different on the rest of the world, but the sun is shining, and I am sitting here again today with Roger Hanson of Roger Hanson Live. Hey, Roger.
Hello, how are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good, Roger. Pretty good. Having having some interesting thoughts today about what we're going to be doing on the show today. We have a guest again. We spoke to Chris Dugood a couple of weeks back, and today we have been approached by Rush of Waves, and he will be hopefully joining us a little bit later. But I thought, Roger, before we get going, I thought that we had a really interesting talk last week where we were talking about truth and the Lord of wisdom and how to love. And I was wondering, starting this show today, we've been looking a lot at spirituality, but today with Rush of Waves, we're hoping to get a little bit into electricity. And so
hmm
I was wondering if you could just give us a little bit of your perception of where we've been and where we're going up till now.
Well, for me, it's like I said in the conversation before. I'm really from where we're going. It's pretty strange, but like from where we've been, just from the experiences from it. Just discussing this topic has kind of woken me up to a lot of things that I wasn't aware of before. Because I didn't realize that there was so much frustration and stuff like that involved in this topic, because there's a lot of people who have a problem with hearing this stuff, and there's really nothing bad about it. You know what I mean? This is it's very interesting. You know what I mean? If nothing else, it's something that would help you understand things a little bit more, in my opinion. But for me, that's what I got from it. I've gotten more of an eye opener of just having this conversation and doing this stream with you.
Mm.
How touchy this is for a lot of people. It really strikes a nerve on people because they get uh, a misunderstanding of what we're talking about. They really don't understand it, and where we're going with it, I believe, is we're going to the top. We're figuring it out,
Mhm.
and that's the best way of doing it. It's just like today when Russia Waves left the message in chat about electricity, that just kind of like clicked in my head. I was like, oh man, that is the perfect example for duality. And not one
It
time did I
is,
think of it.
yeah, it's fascinating. And I realized that last week when we were talking about how men have attacked you for talking about duality and women have attacked me about
hmm
talking about. I realized that it may be a reflection of the divisiveness that we see around us and the division that we have in society, and that people have adopted these attitudes of confrontation with each other. And when some people like us come along and we say, oh, well, we don't actually see it in a confrontational way, people become very confrontational about that.
Yeah,
Don't you think?
yeah.
Hmm.
I also think that it's thousands of years of freaking brainwashing and being beaten over the head with believing in a certain way, and then all of a sudden people introduce something to you that you've never heard before,
Hmm.
and you can't handle that because that's not what your preacher tells you, or your priest, or your rabbi,
Hmm.
or that's not what they tell you. That's not what they've been taught.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
it causes a lot of stress, even
Hmm.
though this stuff is literally inside of all of the religious literature, going back to the
Right.
beginning of mankind. You know, that doesn't belong here. You know, yeah, it does. It's a part of it.
Yes. Yes, indeed. It's interesting how there's this basic idea of good versus evil in so many of the very early religious and spiritual searchings. And then we have the development of Christianity and how Christianity changed that idea of dualism, of good versus evil. And they brought in the idea of the three in one, the, 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 the one God with three natures.
Mm-hmm.
And how now, with sort of the development of uh, science and physics and the exploration of how things work and the rules of the universe, we now have the physicists looking at quantum physics
Mm-hmm.
and quantum mechanics and these very strange non-dualistic ways that almost the spiritual world or some other dimension works in this non-dualistic way, and yet it doesn't negate the fact that the very first thing that we look at is good and evil.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the progression of thought doesn't do away with this basic idea of duality.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And it's like when we were going over Zoroastrianism too. We were discussing before that dualism versus duality. Both dualism and duality had the concept of good versus evil, or good and evil. You know what I mean? But for
Yes.
me, all that kind of got complicated and hard to comprehend. Like, I know for me, I'm not just going to be able to sit back and ponder on the ideas and try to come up with a solution in my head. I'm actually going to have to get serious about it and really
Mhm.
do work to figure this stuff out, because it really is pretty. It's interesting and it's cool to check out. Don't get me wrong, but it is
Mhm.
complex. We were just talking about that.
Yes, it's very complex. You know, when Vince describes consciousness, Vince says that consciousness is the prima materia and that everything in the material world is created out of consciousness. But when he describes consciousness, he calls it the great fractal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fascinating to me because that's, I mean, fractals are just the most complex patterns that you can get. And so it's really um, thought provoking what you're saying. It's so complex. I'm thinking, yes, just like a fractal is. You can look at it and it's this amazing, beautiful pattern. But to really understand it, you have to keep on going in and focusing in and in on smaller and smaller details to understand the whole.
Well, see, you gotta understand my part in this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You gotta understand my part in this, okay? Whenever I first was interested in doing this with you, okay, the reason why I got interested in it was because I was listening to you, Vince, and Julian, alright? And there were things that you said that dawned on me because I had learned some stuff here and there. And first of all, you were big on the feminine and the masculine aspects, and duality kept popping up in your guys' conversation. And
Right.
then all the time that you guys were talking, Zoroastrianism just kept popping out at me, and the reason why was because a lot of the things that you guys talk about has to do with Buddhism or Hinduism or Zoroastrianism, which is all a part of the same origin. They came from Indo-European cultures.
Mm.
Okay, and
Mm.
like the good mind. The good mind is that part of the mind that you have to focus on. But then Asha, okay, which is
Mm.
what was talked about in Zoroastrian. That was created by Ahura Mazda in his mind, in Ahura Mazda's mind. Okay, and that is what not Julian, but Vince is talking about. Okay, the consciousness. Okay, it was
Mm.
created in Ahura Mazda's mind, and it wasn't released into the material world yet. You see, so that's the same
Interesting.
that's the same concept as
It's the
what he's
same
talking about.
concept.
You
Mm.
know, and I get what you're saying about the fractal thing too.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with Vince's uh, religion that he has delineated, that he calls elementalism. What what he's done is that he has taken classical Greek thinking,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very masculine based way of thinking, based a lot on conflict and conquering and achieving. And in fact, that whole society that the Greeks built up came came as a result of the hordes, they call them, the the men who came from the north, the warring tribes who came from the north,
Yep.
who swept down through Europe and replaced the very peaceful agricultural societies that you had there. And so these tribes that came through conquering were were warriors and
Mm-hmm.
very had very warlike gods. And so the Greek thought was something that grew up out of those roots. And so it was very masculine, and it was a lot about, Socrates and Aristotle and very rational thinking and achievement based living. And what Vince has done is that he has married those ways of thinking with the Eastern Dharmic religions. And
Mm-hmm.
he's brought in the whole feminine aspects of acceptance and um, uh, non harm, and that you are ultimately responsible for the world that you create,
Right.
as in Zoroastrianism. So I find his religious thought to be fascinating, or spiritual thought, shall I say, to be fascinating, because he's one of the few people who has joined these thinkings, these types of thinking together. But it's very complex to explain that, because you've got to dig right back into these histories and see the roots of it before you can really appreciate the complexity of how he's joined these thoughts together.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's pretty cool listening to you guys when you do those shows, because whenever I hear it, it just brings back a lot of the stuff that I have been reading. And like with the Greeks, you need to understand
Mm-hmm.
too, the Greeks, those invaders from the north, those were the Indo-Europeans that I was discussing. So they
Right.
they weren't they weren't nice, and they weren't peaceful. Don't let me
Yeah.
fool you on that. Okay,
Mm.
they
Yes.
they were a lot more peaceful than what the Greeks were. So, but
Yeah.
I'll put it to you that way. But
Yeah.
they weren't nice guys. As a matter of fact, a lot of the stuff that I learned about history was pretty brutal, and I've heard of one actually society that was peaceful supposedly, and they were the ones that were, oh, I forgot the name of them. They're the ones that were in, I think it was, um, right next to India. They were a tribe of peaceful uh,
Hmm.
tribes that they didn't. They just vanished. I forgot the name of them.
Wow.
I forgot.
I'm sure it'll come to you.
I'll figure it out one of these days.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah, it'll come to you.
I told you, don't expect anything intelligent from me today because I didn't bring no notes with me. So,
Uh, you know, you mentioned that the people who came down were very warlike tribes.
mm-hmm.
And it is actually one of the fascinating things about the development of the Dharmic religions is that they are the religions of peace in
Mm-hmm.
today's world. And yet they came out of these incredibly fierce warriors. I mean, the Buddha himself was a soldier. He
Mm-hmm.
was, I think, a general or something in his father's army, and he left the life of being an incredibly fierce, disciplined soldier and living this aesthetic life. He left that life in order to find the nirvana, peace,
Mm-hmm.
perfection, you know. So it's a strange thing about the duality of human nature is that out of very violent people come very, very passive people. Oh, look, and here is Rush,
Oh,
right on cue
there he is.
to
Good.
add to this. All
Now,
right.
now he gets to talk.
So,
I'll ask questions, but it's his time to talk. So,
talk. Welcome, Rush. How are you?
Hello. I was just trying to wait out a plane that's flying by. It sounds like a old twin-engine Cessna out there.
All right. Checking up on you, seeing if anything's going wrong there in the woods.
Nice. Yeah, everything is. Yeah, that's good. I got patrol.
So, Rush,
How-
let me
how-
introduce you to Roger Hansen. Roger, this is Rush of Waves.
nice to meet you,
He
Russell.
lives. Yeah.
Hello, Roger.
What I know about Rush, we are doing this as a podcast without visuals. So it all has to be done through the word. So what I know about Rush, Roger, is that he lives in the forest with his dogs. And the reason that he chose to move away from corporate life and the cities is that he suffered a severe spinal injury in his youth. And so he lives constantly with pain, and his life is about rising above sort of the negatives of life. And so he has amazing insights that he can offer.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Wow, Bob Dub, you know me better than I do.
You are an
Mhm.
amazing person and so interesting. And one of the things that we have, Roger and I have been really keen to speak to you about is your perception of duality, because you approached us with the idea that one of the things that we haven't looked at all is the scientific or the realistic, if you like, uh, aspect of duality. So, as an expert in duality, I am, well, since you are an expert in duality, I am really keen to hear on what your take is on what is duality to start off with.
What is duality? Hmm. Very interesting. I guess it's probably a lot of things. What I'm thinking that it is the uh, something that is split in two, and or opposing forces, and uh, you know, I I don't know if I know how to define it. I think that it is something that embodies many things, maybe. Uh, and duality might mean different things where it is, wherever it may be.
Mhm. Absolutely. And one of the things that Roger and I have been discovering as we've been talking through this subject is that even though the forces, these two opposing forces that we can identify, even though they appear to be in opposition, they seem to work together to produce unity.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, interesting. I don't know. It almost is like you could find duality in anything. I was recently thinking about just intelligence in general, and when I look at the elements themselves, they exhibit intelligence. But is that intelligence, or is that effect? And
Mhm.
somehow some subsequent chain reaction that is enabled. So is or is the whole um, the whole space that we inhabit, is it just impervious, or is it filled omnious of intelligence? Is everything made of intelligence? I don't know, because when I look at fire, it sure seems smart, and but then you know and electricity, which is something that I guess popped into my mind when you asked me about duality, is electricity, and when it actually yeah, it produces something, it's duality.
Yeah,
Now
it's
that
fascinating.
that's what caught my attention. Like on your take of electricity and duality, could you kind of like give us a lecture on that? Like talk for hours about it if you can, because that really caught my attention. I mean, because that's a perfect example in my mind. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. You hit that one right on the
Yeah,
nose.
well, it's close relative magnetism, and I've seen a lot of depictions of the male masculine energy being electricity, and or the harnessing of, and the feminine being magnetism, or it's just the harnessing of magnetism, and then both of those elements themselves have duality. So there's this maybe Mandelbrot effect of duality, um, that we might explore in that. Electricity is so fascinating. Um, it really is, and I think that we have access to very little understanding of it. Maybe on paper, I don't know. Maybe uh, through our spiritual body, our material bodies, we may have intelligence. If we looked long enough, we might be able to figure it out. It might be something innate in existence, this intelligence that drives us to find these dualities and to make sense of them, and thus have an effect. There's this, like bobdub said, that something is created out of that duality. Um,
It's
yeah.
fascinating that electricity, when people talk about electricity, they talk about electrons, but the electrons don't move until people make them move. And then they only move because we make them move towards the positrons.
Well, I mean, there's
So,
electricity in nature, is there not?
Yeah, see, and that's what caught my attention there is because okay, you take a look at lightning. Okay, lightning.
yes.
When you what I thought of when I thought of the feminine aspect was you look at lightning, and lightning is scary. Don't get me wrong, but it's also beautiful. And you're looking at the aesthetics of it. You're looking at the beauty of nature right there. But
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
when you take a look at what's underlying the lightning, you'll see what makes it work, and that is the masculine aspects of it. So you have what you see that's beautiful, which is the feminine, and then you have what lies underneath.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
Mm.
that stuck out to me. And then like things fascinate me about electricity too. Like uh, lightning will try. Its sole purpose is to make it to the Earth. Period.
Yes.
You know, it doesn't
Yes.
care about anything else. It wants to make it to the Earth only so that it can ground out. You know.
Well, it's because the water vapor in the cloud is ionized, so it's negatively charged. So by comparison, the surface of the Earth is positively charged. And so nature doesn't like these differences. Nature works to unity. And so the negative charge travels out of the cloud to the surface of the Earth in order to negate itself.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting how you pull something apart and it just reaches back to unite again?
Yes.
And I like, that how you're making a distinction, or you started to, about how we make electricity move, because electricity moves in this. It does the same thing in nature when it just happens, and then we sort of build things to simulate the perfect environment for it to exist, and we try and build it with the most efficiency so we don't lose power. But nature is so abundant with electricity, it just can just rain from the sky and try 1,000 times until it connects, and it surely will. Yeah, it's the most fascinating thing and scary. Like Willie said, your hair will stand up on end, and you feel like you're this cat that got snuck up from behind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty
The
cool.
thing that I was thinking about with man-made electricity is that nature's electricity kills you. Man harnessed electricity to make it work for him. Like God provided and said, okay, here's the raw material, see what you can do with it. And so, we needed to make it into something that, well, first of all, we needed to understand it. Once we'd understood it, then we made it into something that we could utilize for the furtherance of human species. How can we use this to a positive effect? Because lightning, like you say, Roger, it's beautiful and it's dramatic and it's awesome, but it's also deadly.
Right. Yeah. And also realize too that man-made electricity is deadly too. So anybody who messes around with electricity, understand that you need to have an understanding of how it works, because it is a dangerous force and it can kill you. Just put that out there.
Yes. We have put in a lot of checks and balances in order to be able to harness that power. Yes, we have.
Now,
Yeah.
what sticks out to me is Tesla. Okay, everybody talks about Nikola Tesla, about this and that, but like the actual experiments that he did with electricity, I mean, the man was a genius. I forgot the name of that device he had, but he could touch it and like have electricity flowing through his fingers. I forgot
What
the
is
name
that
of
thing
it.
called? That globe thing.
Yeah, it doesn't actually go into your body. It travels around the thin space around you, and then will connect ground through your ethereal body. I mean, I don't know. It's pretty crazy. All that, yeah. Yeah, and I would bet you have to tune that to do that, because you can't just charge up a capacitor and touch the ends and expect it to not go through you. Yeah. I really loved his work with the mechanical oscillators and sound waves and stuff. Just he got to do a lot of cool stuff.
Mm.
let's see, with sound waves, that's the one thing that I really got into too when it comes to a lot of that, because most people, well, you know how, well, Vince, okay, he likes to talk about vibrations, okay,
Mm.
and like people don't realize how important vibrations really are. Like when it comes to sound waves, they'll take satellites and aim them at planets to see the vibration of that planet, and that's caused because of the sound waves of the planet. It's literally causing it to
Yes,
vibrate. You know,
yes. Isn't that fascinating?
it's beautiful. I mean, planets are singing to you from outer space.
Yes. Well, I believe that electricity does too. Doesn't electricity itself have a sound, and electromagnetism also generates sound, which is fascinating because according to the Judeo-Christian tradition, God used sound as the mechanism to create matter.
Yeah. First, there
So,
was the
like
word.
whatever, yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Created the.
some people say that that there's no such thing as gravity. That in fact, what keeps the Earth and the planets all in tune with each other is not gravity, but electromagnetism. Have you heard that, Roger?
Uh, what is it? The electric. It's something universe, electrostatic universe, or something
All
like
right.
that. They believe, or the electroplasmic. It's a name like that. It's been a while since I checked it out, but it's actually pretty fascinating with some of these guys' research on it and everything. And to be honest, I haven't dug too deep into the whole aspect of how deep they're going. Like they're going pretty deep when it comes to the
Mm-hmm.
universe and how it works. Um, but what I have seen, like you can see their experiments on the internet if you want to look at it. Like, and they'll show simulations of what they consider to be like our solar system and how it works, and they use just pure electricity. You know, so
Amazing.
I do find that very interesting. You know,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
I I
Very interesting.
I would really I'd really love to be able to figure out more of that. It's been at least 4 or 5 years since I even looked at anything on that.
Mm.
So I really thought it was
Mm.
cool when I did see it.
Mm. So, Rush, were you saying that electromagnetism is the combination of the masculine and feminine forces?
I mean, I think we can define the two things that are at play when we talk about electricity. So, I mean, I'm not all too. Um, I think this we use so the words we choose are what we choose to, so we can see this duality, and so masculine and feminine, the two parts of electricity, and then um, the way that we manifest and embody this masculine and feminine, and bring it to life and paint it into the, the art exhibit that is the human being, and all the plants and trees and animals that also do the same thing. Uh, it's fascinating, this electromagnetism. They work together, and they seem to be the same thing. And I would go on to think that there's a possible multiple things that govern our universe,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it seems to be that that's one of them for sure.
Mm. There are multiple things. I think that it's interesting also that there's this aspect of cooperation that you see in magnetism, and there's this aspect of competition that you see in electricity. I mean, electricity flows from one force to one terminal to the next terminal. But magnetism is more of a static thing. Doesn't We can't get magnetism to flow. We can get electricity to flow.
Well, interesting. Have you ever heard of paleo electricity?
No, what's that?
It's the tiny bits of electricity that are created in your body and especially your bones from heat and pressure. So electricity is created when you put heat and pressure, and like when wind blows, it's bumping into itself and rubbing across things, and it's creating pressure and then heat. And out of that, also electricity. And it's just tiny, but over huge spaces and surfaces, a ton of, a blanket. You can start getting sparks. Carpet can build up enough
Mm-hmm.
to
Mhm.
take a look at and get surprised by.
Yep.
But it's almost permeating everything in existence. This electricity, whether you see it or not, kind of like fire, is but heat on a journey of this thing that we're calling. We're bumping into each other, creating friction, and fire becomes, when you cross the threshold of that material's capability of holding heat. When it goes above its threshold, you have ignition, and that ignition pulls in oxygen because it burns off a piece of oxygen, and that starts to create more wind. And now you've got this self-sustained thing going on that is going to possibly grow bigger if it has fuel. So, and out of that, I've had a lot of fires in. It seems to have an electrical nature itself. Really hard to detect because it's so fluid and like water, And then the same thing, water, as we know, can carry electricity, and it's invisible in there to our eyes. And yes, fascinating. It flows through things. That's one of the things you said earlier, is that how it flows through things. It doesn't necessarily move; it travels like a wave, and yeah, it's incredible.
It's like when you were mentioning it being invisible as well. I find that part the fascinating thing about it too. Like, this is an invisible force which works behind the scenes. So I mean, when it comes to electricity, that is probably what really stuck out to me. It's probably the best example for something that has a real strong masculine aspect, you know what I mean, for nature, because you don't see electricity unless it's made visible, you know what I mean? Like, even nature creates the visibility. Like, there's still electricity flowing around you that's completely invisible in the air all around us right now as we speak. I mean,
Well,
that's an
to,
amazing
to our
concept.
eyes, I think if you had what is that heat vision, I
Mm-hmm.
think it might come up on that type of lens, because you would see the heat being created by higher amounts of voltage running through things. So you'd be able to pick up a wire, or you would just see a glow of a tree, and its energy, or a person. It must be part of the auric field, is that small amount of energy and electricity that's there surrounding you. And some people can have ability, they say, to see those things. I don't know if I do. I have to actually see a spark, and then I
Yeah.
know it's there. But yeah, it's fascinating, because you
It
don't
is.
necessarily see the electricity; you see the heat that it's producing.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
The energy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
That's
thinking about what you're saying about fire and combustion, and I'm pretty sure that it is a sort of electricity. It's definitely a transfer of ions. I mean, with with burning, the product of burning is carbon dioxide. So the negative ion from the oxygen has joined with the positive ion of the carbon to produce carbon dioxide. So you have had a flow of negative to positive ions within that combustion process. I've never
Huh.
thought of that before, but that's not actually classic electricity, but it's the flow of negative and positive forces.
Right. It's the presence of. So paleoelectricity doesn't necessarily have to move. It builds up until it can reach and ground out with something, but it sits and builds until it has that electromagnetism effect to feel something that it can ground out to, and it starts to get pulled towards it. I had the most beautiful thing that happened to me. I used to be a camp host. I'd have fires every night in my fire pit. And one night I was out of wood, so I just used bark all night long. And I filled that, I mean, I put a few inches of ash from just the bark. And we had a real nice fire, got nice and hot and even. And at the end of the night, I took a rake and I smoothed it all out just to let it burn itself out. And we were still all standing around there talking, and as we watched this dust, and so the dust from the bark is super fine. It's finer than the dust from wood when it burns. So we're sitting there and we're watching this grid form on the top of the dust inside the fire ring that perfectly fit inside the ring in almost like a star-like pattern. And in each node where the lines started coming together, there would be a little flame that would light up, and that flame fed a little current of air to each fire, to each flame was pulling the air, and it started cutting this grid to the dust of the.
Uh-oh, your volume's gone, Rush.
Oh no!
Oops. Okay, sounds like you're back.
Where did where'd you lose me?
it,
Up to
it,
the flames, all the
The
nodes coming together and a little flame.
right, the little flames were causing that current of air, and the air was carving out this connection between each node, which is drawing this like almost somatic looking shape that was a star. And we all watched this happen. It was so beautiful, and it like evolved, and each little node got stronger, and another node would form, and this space just started filling in geometrically. And I is so.
That must have been an amazing thing to experience. I'm sort of trying to imagine it. I've sort of seen fires do that, sort of sparkling, as if the energy moves throughout the wood in different ways.
when it comes
Yeah, I
to
don't know.
when it,
If it was,
oh,
Whoops.
uh, see there.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, when it comes to fires like that, what I notice too is like if you do a fire that reacts that way and you do it right during the time when you have like a small sprinkle in a big fire, you take and
Mm-hmm.
you can see it do that, not like a downpour or anything, just like when it's sprinkling outside, have a big fire set up, and you can actually see the wood react like that, like he's describing. It's pretty cool. I grew up with a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people who are country folks, so we like to go out and cause trouble on the weekends. But yeah, that brought back
Well, that's
good
how you
memories.
find is Mess around and find out, right? All in the process of. Um,
Yes, those are the rules of living in the country. There's definitely other rules. It's
yeah.
fascinating how we're talking about duality, and yet so many of these patterns that we've referenced, and like those patterns that you've just been describing, Rush, um,
Mhm.
they're not linear patterns when we look at them. Like, for instance, lightning, okay, it comes from the sky and to the earth, but with lots of different branches. And the same way that you're talking about the fire being in lots of different nodes. I think that's another thing to remember, is that even though in our minds we can separate these ideas out into two opposites, in actual the way that it works in the world, it's not really separate, is it? Are you there, Rush?
Yeah, yeah, no, I definitely agree. There's all the things that seem to be separate are definitely connected in some ways. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I think you can still define that it is also separate. So not only is it connected, but it is also separate.
See,
It's
that,
a real,
that's kind of the duality of it. You know what I mean? Like, um, back when Karma was on my show with me, you know, she was really, really upset whenever you tried to talk about the differences, and it's hard for people who want everybody to think that they're connected to also think that they're separate. You know what I mean? Like, you are separate individuals with different mindsets, different ways of, that's duality as well. And that goes with everything, nature, it goes with humans, it goes with religion, all that stuff, you know what I mean? It just, we're we're connected, but we're also separate.
mm,
So I think that's what
mm,
makes things so cool, you know what I mean, about life. I mean, that's diverse. That's true diversity. That's not, you know what I mean?
it's fascinating how something as simple as opposites makes something as complex as life. I mean, I'm just thinking now of breeding of men and women, like a male and a female thing coming together to make a completely complex person.
Human life,
No.
you know?
Oh wow.
Now, the one thing that I want to know though is what's his take on two opposites can't occupy the same space. Do you agree with that or not?
What was it that can't?
Two two
What can't?
opposite two opposites can't occupy the same space. What's your thoughts on that?
Two opposites.
Yes.
Two or like
So
two things that are opposite. Can they embody the same space? Well, I mean, it depends on what you call space. So it's like if you're saying the space of the whole field, there are definitely two different opposite things in that field together. But the exact space, if you were to, I mean, like microscopically go all the way down, I would guess that two things cannot occupy the same space. They might be leaning on each other, um, or have become one new thing. So then, yes, those two things are now occupying the same space, but you'd call it something different
mhm,
because they're now joined.
that would be like breeding, like a baby, a whole
Yeah.
new thing. But like with something like say thoughts, you can't have a positive thought and a negative thought at the same time. Can you? Or can you? Can you hold a negative thought and a positive thought together in your mind at the same time? Or does one replace the other?
No, I think you could feel something. It's like that saying about what masculinity really is being able to be violent, but knowing how to harness that wild nature and that thing that makes things happen. You can't just go around, and it doesn't build up to become more masculine if it keeps connecting. That's the electricity kind of look at things. It says, as the more it grows, the more dangerous, obviously, it becomes, and the more powerful it becomes. And I think when we say masculinity, or these things, these forces, they don't necessarily inhabit intelligence. It's us that puts the intelligence in there, and we're able to keep that force from grounding when it's inappropriate, and build it and harness it. Obviously, harnessing the force would be more valuable over the long run, because you would be able to, apply that force. So, yeah, I might be meandering about now, but yeah.
No, it's interesting.
That kind of goes into electricity too, though. Like, could positive and negative occupy the same space?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a battery, if you have a battery and you're calling that battery a space, then that battery occupies both the negative and the positive.
But they're separated, aren't they, within the battery?
Right. Within the battery. I mean, there's further, if you look closer, they're not together. So it just depends on your definition of what space is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes.
And all the way down to an electron and a neutron, they're separate. But because they're spinning so fast, and we look at billions and trillions of them at a time, they all look unified. So unification and separate may be this thing that is in the same space together all at once. When you pull back and you look at something.
It's kind of like with the thoughts, like in the mind, you could have a bad thought in your head with a good thought, but it all depends on how deep you want to get into that. Are you talking about the thought that's currently on your mind, or are you talking about the thought that's in the back of your head that you're not thinking about at the moment, that's eating away at you, like and it's weird too, because I've actually had conversations with people who don't believe the subconscious exists, and I'm like, seriously, you don't think that a subconscious mind exists? I'm like, it seems odd to me how many people really don't believe that it exists.
I had not thought of that. I like to think, instead of there being a subconscious, I like there to think of there, like Vince's idea is that we don't make consciousness. Consciousness exists outside of us, and our mind is like a radio receptor that receives conscious thoughts. Like you'll say, oh, that thought just popped into my head, as if consciousness comes to you from the outside. And so I like to think of our subconscious as being part of this external consciousness that we are not accessing just at that moment. And you sort of have to change the direction of your thoughts and tune into another type of consciousness or another area of consciousness. So it's not as if it's like under our thinking, but it's above our thinking. It's something we have to reach out to.
Now, don't you think like there's a part in your head that's like storing information that
Memories.
you know what I mean, that's back there? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh well, I was kind of thinking. I mean, you're partially right. Um, so if you were to think of subconscious as this is not just the consciousness, the greater consciousness that everybody has access to, but a subconscious, your subconscious. So it's this chamber inside of you that you put conscious into, and so you go around with your senses and you observe the conscious reality of the world. Everything is conscious, and you start putting little bits of that consciousness into that chamber of subconscious, and over time you build up a subconscious of the conscious thoughts that you put in that chamber, and you become the subconscious, and you're not aware of it happening because you live more in the conscious world, observing things and grabbing things you like and putting it into that place, the subconscious. And inside there forms this person and this being that you use and utilize to react and to further find and look further into the depths of reality and this duality that we're experiencing that's so fascinating. So in conclusion, the consciousness in my eyes is something that's this greater thing that's we all have access to, that's bigger, and the subconscious is the consciousness that we create out of it.
I like that explanation. That makes sense to me. That really does make sense to me. Yeah. So we're about to run out of time, but this is a fascinating, this always happens to me. Right at the end of the show, I start thinking of all these things I want to know. I'd just like to ask one final question to both of you guys to end off with. Lots of people talk about positive thoughts and negative thoughts. We're talking about positive pieces of electricity and negative pieces of electricity and how they need to work together to generate electricity. Do you think that there is any way that positive thoughts and negative thoughts work together in our mind as one whole? Maybe you could start with that, Roger.
I don't think I could be a whole without the bad as well as the good. I mean, it's really good to have a really well or nice life, a great life. You know, if being happy is the only purpose that you have in life, then you have a miserable life. When you go through hardships and you overcome hardships, what happens is you transcend to another level. Okay, you actually have better understanding because you've gone through hard times. So for me, I need the bad times just as well as the good times because that's how I grow. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, I like that. This understanding is the two things you're bringing together and existing at the same time, and though they conflict with each other, you come with you have a new. So I guess I'll just say that my recent experience with my dog, got into a dog fight, and you know, I felt so mad seeing it happen, and I broke it up, and I'm hitting these dogs, and they don't care that I'm there, and they're the wild beasts. They're trying to kill each other, and I don't like that. And I'm right in the middle of it, and I'm punching my dog, trying to get it to let go of this dog so it doesn't kill it. And this other dog, the same thing. He's going to turn around and try and kill my dog. So I'm in the middle, and each time that I threw my fist and hit my dog, there was a part of me that loves him so much. And this is just something bad that's happening right now. And with that, I'm not going to just kill him. I could have just killed him and stopped the fight, but I love this animal. And so I'm not really punching him as hard as I can. And in the back of my mind, I'm trying to come up with a better solution. And I think that having those two thoughts present in me at that moment allowed me to break the fight up without hurting them. And I know they still hurt each other, but I stopped it, and things, were done. But without that, if there was a different dog that was attacking, say, my dog, I wouldn't hesitate to just kill it. Like, I'm not going to try and find a better solution and risk more of me in the situation. So yeah, I felt that two things existed: a good thought, but also a bad thought. Of having to do something I didn't want to do, and I figured a third better thing out.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Fascinating. Really, really good example. Really good example. Well, Rush and Roger, thank you very, very, very much indeed for a fascinating conversation. And also, listeners, thank you very much for being with us throughout. And thank you for those of you who are still with us. It's great to have you along. Please remember to drop any of your questions in the comment section, and we will maybe get back to you next time, and we can carry on this conversation. So yeah. Thank you so much, Rush. Thank you very, very much for being with us. It's so interesting to hear your point of view.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. It was good to meet you, Roger. Thank you again. It was very, very fascinating and lovely time talking about some really cool stuff.
I appreciate it too. It was a great topic. I was really happy that you were coming on the show because you really caught my attention, man. It's pretty smart.
Awesome. Well, and thank you also, Roger, for once again doing this show with me. It is one of the highlights of my week, I must say. And we will be back again this time next week. So for now, goodbye.